Hey everyone, welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the show where we talk about all the things that we're not talking about, even with loved ones or friends, or ways that we're not talking about them, such as maybe more directly with each other. So today I am joined by Lyonel Laverde. Is it Laverde or Laverde?
Say Laverde, that's fine.
Okay. And we know each other through a program that we did called Landmark several years ago now. We were gonna talk about our experience with that, but we've got onto a more interesting topic, which is kind of where the country is at today, the divide. I am a liberal, sort of agnostic, spiritual, believe in God, come from a Christian background, but don't identify that way right now. Lyonel is a Christian and kind of leans conservative. And we were talking about a phenomenon that we're both concerned with, which is a lack of tolerance for other people and other perspectives and beliefs, a lack of space for that and room for that. And I kind of want to dive into a little bit more what integrity means to you, too, in terms of standing by your faith or your beliefs, and we can both speak to that, while also allowing room for diversity around you. So, I mean, if you're up for it, let's start with that. What do you feel like it means to you to hold a sort of moral integrity in the world within the way you identify and what you believe?
Okay. Well, first of all, just talk to you, Rebecca. I would say it's a good question because I think that for myself, integrity is very important. I know that when we were in the Landmark Forum together, they mentioned that. And, I think it's just a simple case of just being true to yourself. Not, we can go into the moral realm, but I think more importantly, it's just, is this something that you truly believe in? It's something that you're really doing, or is it something you're doing because you think it's fashionable, or you're getting some type of adult peer pressure or something like that? And I think a lot of times you have to do that kind of reality check, that assessment. Is this really something, and I don't say that because I want to advocate for being antisocial. I think human beings are very social creatures, and you do have to be considerate of others. But at the same time, you have to know, is this really what you can be? What's the right word? Not necessarily proud, but just satisfied with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think when I think about integrity, it really means is what's on the inside, what's on the outside. And I don't mean in the sense of like showing everybody what you're all of you, like, oh, I'm an asshole, that's just me. But that I have chosen these values and this way of life. And is that reflected in the way that I'm showing up in the world truly through my actions and everything that I do? And I think that there can be a confusion with some people on integrity, meaning I have chosen a stance and I'm going to enforce it in every circumstance that I'm in, right? I think sometimes when people choose a belief, they feel like having loyalty to their choice is where the honor stands. And I think I have noticed that definitely on the left and on the right, and certainly in I would say both non-religious and religious circles, but certainly in Christianity, I think sometimes I have witnessed that. I don't know what you would would say to that. But, you know, when you have a specific set of beliefs that are very fixed, we've all agreed on this together, we're part of this shared faith, then you're going to have, some people are going to have the temptation that they stand by those things and only those things. So I don't know. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think for me, there's also a difference, not necessarily if you're true to your beliefs, but how you go about uh, declaring or manifesting that. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That in other words, there are some people that make a big show of something, and other people who sometimes are more private in their beliefs, or private in the way they follow and adhere to that. Because again, you know, they're just different types of points of view, and I can understand if you're in a congregation or something like that, and you have very clear parameters. But of course, it's another thing if, you know, you're trying to, you know, create a statute, you know, a local statute saying, oh, the 10 Commandments must be treated as the law of the land. I think that's it. That you're going in a different direction altogether.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. What about instances, though, where there is an issue that, for example, and I brought this up with another guest I had, of like, I want murder to be illegal. Okay. Whether you call it an ethical or a moral concern, I don't need to explain that further. I don't want it to be legal. And I would probably um, be pretty harsh in the way that I stood up for laws that protected us from people who are just going off and murdering people, or pedophiles, or whatever it is. Like, I don't want those people to be able to do whatever they want to do. So when you have a very strong belief and you fight for it, there are some issues that people feel like, well, I have a moral imperative to make sure this is true for everyone, even if it wouldn't necessarily affect me. But I would say in both liberal and conservative circumstances, and often on the opposite side of that, people have those issues where it's like, yeah, you can say live and let live, but if you really strongly believe something is evil, let's say, understandably, there is a side where it's, you know, there's a fine line between live and let live and I don't want this to be the law. So, I mean, how do you see people navigating that, and how do you navigate that?
Ooh, interesting. Wow, a little more complicated than I thought. I mean, I think what's interesting is that we're in a time where it seems like a lot of norms are getting challenged, and I'm surprised that they are, and it makes me wonder: are we afraid, or is the kind of consensus about what are the you know moral parameters, is that really being challenged? I yeah, it's really confusing to me. I'm going to be honest. It's a surprise to me. Like you're saying, I mean, just to me, something like murder or something like, or abuse of children. I mean, I just thought that was just a no brainer. I can't imagine on any level that's going to be an issue. And it's just very interesting right now that a lot of things are coming out. As you know, I mean, without even getting into too much detail, it's interesting that a lot of things that were very illicit are coming out to the public view.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How people react, and I think it's definitely a moral challenge. You know, because what is another issue, another elephant in the room, if I may say, Rebecca, is that, and this is something that gets talked about, but sometimes more in a propagandic way, if that makes sense. Is that the right term? Propagandic? Uh, because there's a lot of sloganeering, but there is a real issue about inequality. And there's a real question is, if you're powerful enough or wealthy enough, do you escape the judgments of the law? I mean, and that's a real question. Is it just the argument that if you just have enough resources, it doesn't matter how heinous your violation is? And I really want to believe that no. I think there's a certain point where, regardless if you are a believer or not, if you allow certain things, as like what you just mentioned, to go on without any kind of uh, you know criminal enforcement, then what are you saying? I think certain things have to be fundamental, and I didn't know they'd be subject for debate, but I think this is the problem when you extend privilege for so long to certain people, to the point where there's nothing like blocking it, or nothing, or you're getting slaps on the wrists. Um,
It's a hard thing because I think, and like I'll speak it out loud in terms of, um, conservatives have some. I mean, again, I will always say this is on both sides, but there are currently some conservative leaders who have been found out for certain things. And it's really, like you're saying, it's really just people of power, whatever you're on. But what does one do when faced with a leader that you don't feel like you can get behind, but the other side may be something that you feel has is morally problematic in other ways, right? So I think a lot of people are faced with this. I was faced with this just with, if we were going to be voting for Joe Biden a second term, it's like, do I have concerns about his age and his abilities, but I can't vote for the other side. So what am I going to do? What do you put up with in your leaders when you know that you have to vote, or you could not vote, which I think sometimes it's like, on a pragmatic level, it's silly if you don't. But I mean, how does one deal with that when you're faced with the people that are supposed to represent the values that you want to uphold are in other ways undermining the values of your faith or belief system?
mm. Well, for me, one thing that I would say was a big thing that I notice is, in a nation of what is it, 330 so million people. Like, I mean, the population of the United States, I think, is roughly around a third of a billion people. And every 4 years, we come down to like two choices, and two choices that have actually a really limited amount, maybe 20 candidates. And I know for a lot of people, that's even a lot of candidates, because I understand that when it comes to elections, people are busy. I get that. I just wish we had a greater pool of talent to decide from. Because I think that the idea that this is all we have, either the experienced politician who may be a little too experienced, maybe a little too much set in the ways of Washington, and the other guy who's the anti-establishment iconoclast who doesn't really care much for norms and laws that much, but can get things done, or at least is perceived to get things done. And I just don't know why there isn't something in the middle, a happy medium, a figure who might have some experience in leadership, but who still can be conciliatory, who can still work with different parts of the country. I mean, the reality is, no leader that we have is going to be able to please everyone. That's a given. It's just that's not even about our country or our time. That's just human nature. You're never going to please everybody. But I've just fascinated that we have these just stark choices. And the other thing that I notice is that we seem to be lurching from one side to the other. So if the side I even lurch my own head. So we go from a very, this way and then that way and all that. And at the end of the day, regardless of the ideology, what is it really doing for the people? Now, I think there are moments of progress that come from both sides, but I just feel bad that it's now become this really negative situation. And it's very interesting because years ago, when I was working on a play, I got this guy who was a brilliant guy who was a playwright, fascinating guy who was the director of my play. And this is back in, I'm not kidding, this is 2007, just to give you some context. So that was a while ago. We're talking literally almost 20 years ago. And we had he was a very brilliant guy. I think he had a PhD from the University of Vienna, but he came back. It's a long story. He's half Austrian, half Irish American. Great character. And I asked him, how come we don't talk about politics? And he told me then, he said, it's too much like professional wrestling. It's too much this kind of what they call kayfabe, this kind of kabuki. We'll do this, you'll do that, and everybody's performing for the cameras and all that, and nobody wants to do the simple job of governing. And it's just fascinating to me because in any other field, we expect professionalism. And I was bringing this up recently because remember recently that little clip that was a screenshot as a meme that came from the president's I think social account about showing the Obamas like represented like monkeys. I want to bring that up for one reason. It's not because I don't get that was a joke. I'm not even going to leave. I'm not even going to go there. What I'm going to say is that if you were a manager of a store, if you were an executive at a company, and you'd release that, you would have real consequences. There'd be boycotts. If you were lucky, you'd have to be suspended, might have to have sensitivity training, and maybe you get to keep whatever you had. But a lot of cases, you'd be fired. You'd be let go. And if, in fact, you may remember a couple of years ago, there was even an owner of the LA Clippers who got caught saying a lot of things that were seen as racist. He had to divest his own company. It was an owner, not even just, mind you, not even just a manager, an owner. And so that tells you that there's clearly a standard there. And the idea that in our politics, we prefer the performing of representing your side over just doing your job, just showing just basic boilerplate respect, regardless of what you think in your personal life. And I think it's just interesting that we're just faced with these really subpar choices now. And no surprise, it's undermining people's confidence. But at the same time, I hope people challenge themselves to say, you know what, let's go for somebody who maybe not always that exciting, but gets the job done. I don't know. So I get a little intense about that.
Well, I mean, that's a really good point. The maybe not all exciting thing. It kind of reminds me of how often the right partner for you is not the one that makes your heart beat through your chest and up to the sky. It's the person who's steady, who's well matched for the most part, who has their flaws, but can kind of go along side by side with you. And the hard part is that we have become so unhappy, everyone with the country, and so unhappy with the situation that we can't imagine choosing somebody who's not going to do very much. Right? Like, I think, on the left, it's like, well, we've got to get somebody who's completely reversing all of the stuff that where the direction we're going in. We can't have somebody who just hits the pause button on things, and ends up, that was major complaints with some of our Democratic candidates were that they were business as usual, which I think also caused a lot of people not to come out. And then, people on the right clearly have an appetite for change and for for a different system, and not for business as usual either. So it's hard when you're dissatisfied in yourself and your situation to be able to choose anything that is moderate. Because you feel like, well, this got to be desperate measures. So I wonder how it can even change, really, beyond continuing to go farther apart. I don't know, but I agree with you. I mean, I think about this all the time. There's so many incredible strategists and consultants in the business world. There's so many people who are able to make like incredible decisions about organizational things at a huge scale. And we can't seem to come up with any of those people to run the country. And, and not that a business mindset necessarily translates to a country, but that's a whole other issue. But the ability to think strategically about the things at hand and to think about nuances and things like that, I just think it is really crazy that we haven't managed to either side produce people like that, at least in a really long time or a little while here.
Yeah. I feel like we're getting. It's gotten a little too binary. It's gotten a little too either or. It's either we're going to have the colorless bureaucrat who knows the system, or it's going to be the rabble rousing rebel or iconoclast who's going to break things. And I get the appeal on either side. And notice I deliberately said something outside of ideology, because I think that there's a lot of that's happening. But there's just such a great talent pool of people out there. And there are people that would, just, I think if you're in public office, this is actually supposed to be a sacred trust. The people have invested you with this incredible amount of power. And your job really is not just to, amass power and take it all for yourself. Your job is just to be the custodian while you're there. And put in policies that will, in some level or another, improve lives, or at least mitigate pain and suffering and other issues, so that when you're done, when you leave, because that's the idea, you're not supposed to be there for life. People are better off. And I don't know why that should be controversial.
Well, I recently heard something. There's a podcast called How to Take Over the World, and I got served up some episode with some Stanford professor who was talking about power, and he's a big proponent of taking power and figuring out your relationship to power and things like that. And one of the things they pointed out, which is something that I have noticed as well personally, is that power is a dirty word to most people. Good people are not encouraged to take charge and leadership roles in that way. They are generally also not paid enough. The positions that are like the good charitable jobs aren't paid very well. So there's low motivators to and contrary messaging for good, noble, balanced, humble people to put themselves out there and to campaign well and to do that. And I think on some level, we need to create a definition of power. And I think Kamala was really, really good at this. Create a definition of power that is not corrupt, where somebody can truly take leadership. You see them, you're like, wow, you have warrior energy. You can lead a fight, but not the kind of fight that we're seeing. Like, you can lead equitably. I want you to make decisions for me. Like, because we are built that way in many ways. And I think there's not enough powerful voices of good people because they feel like it's better to be humble and demure.
Mm. Well, it also seems to get into arguments as what is the feminine, what is the masculine, because because it is interesting that we've now had two major women nominees for presidency, and both have lost. That doesn't mean, obviously, that there will never be a serious woman candidate in the future. I believe that will happen. But I keep hearing different arguments that the first woman president will be, like, for lack of a better term, a Margaret Thatcher figure, maybe a strong right wing figure who's not what people are expecting, but will placate a certain segment of the voting population. I don't know. I will say, one of the things that I think was so sadly, misunderstood, and I think by default it was construed as missing from someone like Kamala, is that I feel like she was brilliant and very competent person who would have been a very, very solid president. And I actually felt that when she had this campaign, which obviously came almost out of left field, I felt like she was really dynamic, but she actually stopped herself. You know why? Because I could tell with her rhetoric, she was starting to capture people's ideas. She was starting to get some phenomenal reactions from people. But I think what happened was she hesitated because I think she saw the reaction people that was starting to, believe it or not, turn into demagoguery. In other words, she could have actually started making promises that had no relation to reality. She could have said things that were, and the weird thing was, I think that might have propelled her to victory. And I think that's what's telling them to me is why people want things that are not necessarily realistic. I mean, you could say that about any campaign, but it's fascinating how people want to be told things. And of course, that can be both your dreams. It can also be your fears, right? So it could be the good and the not so good. But it's interesting how, like, you have in New York, right? The new mayor, Zoran Manzami. It's very interesting that the person that he was going against was the former governor of the state of New York. And if you know anything, if you saw those debates, Andrew Cuomo was a very competent, not very charismatic, but very competent, very experienced guy, and who had actually real experience managing things. And what's fascinating in the debates, one thing I kept noticing, he kept telling people, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. Legally, there are issues with this, there's issues with that. People didn't want to hear that. They voted for the guy who tells you can do something. And I think that's very interesting about human nature, that as much as we want a solid professional, as I was just saying, the paradox is people also want someone who can touch on their dreams.
Yeah, who's going to sell them something that they don't even know yet that they can deliver?
Well, I was thinking about that the other day, like President Kennedy, right? One of the things that, of course, captured the imagination of people was that while he was president, while he was alive, of course, he literally said, we're going to go to the moon and bring a person back by the end of the decade. And it happened. And on one level, it seems unbelievably wild and unrealistic. And yet, it captured people. And it says something about it. Now, that might seem as a positive thing. We can debate about that. Captures dreams. Of course, also captures your fears. You can go the other way. Well, I'm going to get rid of such and such people, or I'm going to clamp down. And to some extent, say what you will about President Trump, at least on that level, when it came to going after people not from this country, he definitely kept that promise. Oh.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we as voters have this real weakness that we need to look out for, of wanting those big promises. And that, let's say somebody does embody power in its most noble form, there is still that inner, go back to the word integrity of somebody who has the constraint to say, I don't want to offer something I can't produce, or I don't want to mislead people, or they have their stance. That is, it's like, how much is that on the politician to walk that line so perfectly, like a ballerina, that they have figured out how to market themselves and market a dream, and also be in honesty. But it really is something for us to have to look at ourselves on, of what is it that you want to be told? What is the narrative that you're looking for? And are you seeking to be sold something false? Are you so desperate to get what you want that you're unwilling to hear the limitations on what you can have? And you will drive us to lunacy in the process of not being realistic about. Again, it kind of goes back to dating a little bit. I think
Yes.
sometimes when people, there's various ways that plays out, where it's like people want someone who's perfect in all of these types of ways, and they want this dream life with this dream person. And so then they're not necessarily picking the right choice, but there's also this openness to being influenced and pulled into this narrative dream of this life with this person, and you fall in love with the vision that's created, and that can make you very easy to manipulate as well. And we have to really be like, okay, what really is available? What's really realistic? What am I willing to compromise on and accept about the world?
No, I think you're using a really good comparison, which is, yeah, campaigning in a political sense is a lot like courtship. And I was told by no less a figure than my own father, that he said, if you're really interested in somebody, don't be afraid to flash the cash, wear your nicest clothes, be that kind of person that even if the more sensible part of you is like, well, maybe we can go to the regular joint. No. You have to impress a little. And it's interesting, because part of me sometimes wonders why that's a little false. But as I've gotten older, I actually understand that there might be something more profound about that. Because when I was younger, I actually kind of resented, like, oh, if I got to take this date out, why do I have to go to the most expensive place, right? And I actually think there's a more complicated answer, which is that sometimes a partner, in my case, a female, wants to see, well, how far will I go? How much will I value?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's the argument that if I put on my best clothes, like, I can dress down, but if they see that I dress up, it means that I can dress up, if that makes sense. If I take them to the nicest place, or I buy them the nicest jewelry, it means that I can put them on the highest level. Whereas if I just take them to a regular joint, or I just dress in average clothes, it means that I see you as kind of average. So the weird thing is that, yes, the problem is sometimes these promises are not always super realistic, but they do galvanize people. And I wonder to some extent how much people are wish-fulfilling machines, that we have these things called dreams, or ideals that we want to follow on, and sometimes that gives us a reason to get up and do what we have to do.
I'm also thinking about the fact that like, if you take those personality tests, like when you were in high school or something, and they tell you this is the type of job that you'd be good at or whatever, the people who are like the dreamers and the visionaries are not the same people who are the strategists and the analytical thinkers. And the hard part about politicians, and I think in the perfect world, our country is set up to try to balance this out, right? That you have different people bringing different things to the table. But everybody, I won't say everybody important, but pretty much our system works that you have to get elected. So you have to, at this moment in time, be the best visionary charmer person.
Yeah.
And that's going to end up with both like great people who happen to just, that's their one thing they're good at. And also narcissists. And I think, again, it's like, how can we look at ourselves as voters as well and say, can I look past being won over? And can I look at somebody who's really going to know how to do things, who might not be the winner in that category? But at the same time, you know, again, people that go into that field these days, and I wonder if even things like social media and artifice in general and image in general has made us even more susceptible to being won over by someone who has the biggest personality and most interesting brand, that makes us feel something, even if it's sometimes like uncomfortable feelings. But yeah, I mean, I do want to really reiterate, there are the two sides of responsibility. There's the person who's trying to court the person, and then there's the person being courted, which is you want to see that they're making an effort.
Yeah.
And that they can dress nice and take you out somewhere nice, and that they can put you in that position. But it's also your job to think very critically about, what is this person like in their sweatsuit? And what is this person like on a bad day? And you have to investigate that, right? Like that there's the natural, almost primal mating dance that sort of takes place. And you have to also see, you have to do it, and you also have to see behind it.
Yeah, it's very paradoxical, isn't it? That on one level, you need to see the person in a metaphorical suit or dress, and you need to see them almost at their most glamorous side. But you also have to be genuinely comfortable and pleasant to be with them in their, like you said, in their sweats or their, I guess their homeware, for lack of a better term. It's very strange. Yeah, you want the glamour sometimes, or whatever you want to call it, or you also want the normalcy, I guess, for lack of a better term. You want to be able to know, because I think at the end of the day you have to be that way. I don't care how exciting you are if you're if you can't just be comfortable. And in fact, I was telling somebody recently that my own personal analysis of successful couples is just that they can be around each other, and they're comfortable and happy to be around each other. And they can do things together. That's the only thing that I see, which is that they genuinely, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but they genuinely enjoy each other's company years after they've come to know each other. There's not you again kind of thing, because that's a problem. If they're like, oh, you again, that's not a good sign. That kind of thing, because the reality is the novelty fades, and that's the other thing. Like you're saying with leaders, is that no matter how exciting the initial biography of the leader is, eventually you get to know them, and there's always a potential boredom. There's just, regardless of who you are, there's eventually like, okay, I kind of know what they are. And it's interesting because it seems like the current president is trying to avoid that trap by constantly trying to be unpredictable. But even the unpredictability is predictable. Okay, I'm going to do something totally different. Oh, didn't see that coming.
I want to get back to what we started with, which is the idea of, how do you feel is the ideal way to hold yourself and present yourself when you have strong values and beliefs, and especially if it comes from a spiritual or religious place. But when you interact with other people who are either within like a similar group as you, but have different beliefs, or are completely outside of your beliefs, what does it mean to you to have integrity in yourself? Because I personally, I think that it is important to let everybody speak and be understood. That doesn't mean that I'm going to climb on board with what you're saying. So to me, understanding does not mean acceptance, but it does mean that I have a radical openness to figuring out how you operate. And when I do that, people that I wouldn't have normally agreed with, I start to see the difference between the person and the beliefs or the choices that they've made. And they start to separate out so that there's almost like a sense of a soul or a personhood, and then the things that I didn't like or don't understand. And, or didn't initially understand at least. So I think where I've gotten to that is trying to have radical understanding and radical listening. But there is a lot, especially on the left, I mean, chokingly so, of pressure to stand up for your beliefs and vocalize, this is not okay with me. This is wrong. This is not the direction the country should be going in. This is where I stand. This is who I am. You know, I mean, the most ridiculous example goes back to, and I think I did it, the black square on your profile during Black Lives Matter or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there, you know, a lot of virtue signaling and things where if you're not doing something, then you're against us and you're this terrible person and you're on the other side or you're whatever. And so it is hard to know when is it important to speak up and speak out, and when is it important to listen and observe and maybe even compromise. And I'm interested in your experience with that as somebody who's part of a specific faith too, because there's the faith community that all have different ways of doing that. And also it's a more grounded, established thing, right? Like you have certain tenets that are agreed upon by a group. Whereas for me, it's just kind of like, I can go with where I feel ethically led at any moment. And there's more of a cornucopia of things. So, and especially in a religious faith, there is understandably and rightfully some moral conviction of like, this is the way that God has made the world or has called us to be. And there is a stand to be taken there. At least in Christianity, and I would say Islam is also like that, where there's like we need to take a stand and take a position on things, at least in my understanding of Islam. So yeah, how do you handle that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I really like that term you use, radical openness. I think that's something that it seems contradictory, but it makes a lot of sense. Which is keep the door open and try to understand people. And it's funny that you mentioned Islam, because oddly enough, a thought came into my head, which was, after 9/11, I think somebody asked, the boxing champion Muhammad Ali, like, would you associate, Islam with terrorism, like with the hijackers of that day? And he goes, would you? And then I think he responded more or less saying, would you associate all Christianity with the KKK? And I thought that was a very interesting answer, which is the fact that, you can have a belief, but doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be the most radical element of that belief. And I have to try to keep that in mind, that kind of openness. You want to try to at least understand where someone is coming from, even if you don't agree with them. You realize that something has brought them to a worldview. And I just wish we could live in a world where there's more mutual respect and an attempt to understand. But I do think there have to be some basic parameters for debate. There have to be some basic norms and understandings, like you said before, about a respect for life. Also respect for some just baseline of facts. Now, some facts can be shaded, some facts can be argued, but what is the baseline? What are the very just minimal things that we're going to criteria that we're going to agree upon? Like, what is this? Is not something we're going to argue about, because if we're going to argue about that, then it just becomes, I don't know, an ideological pageant or whatever, and then just people just get lost. And the problem is there are some people that want that. There are some people that only want anarchy, or some people only want chaos. And then I say rather cynically, why is it that that's what you crave? What is the agenda there, or is it just to use that line from The Dark Knight? Some people just want to watch the world burn. Because I do feel that way. I do feel like there's a strange, I've heard that term, doom eagerness. Like some people just want to see things, go to pot, and I go, really? I mean, it's one thing if they happen on their own, but really, why are you so excited with that? Because I feel like that's almost, for lack of a better word, a first world problem, if that makes sense. That because somebody pointed out something very interesting, that often in very poor countries, with certain exceptions, of course, there's actually like low rates of suicide, because when people are struggling to survive, they don't always have time to think, oh my goodness, my life is so unfulfilled.
Unfulfilling.
And it's funny because I didn't mention it, but I work as a tour guide, and I gave a tour yesterday, a guided tour on a vehicle, and we went by in the Hudson Yards, there's a structure called the Vessel. It's a very interesting looking thing. It's used for sightseeing. You can go on. It's this like multi-latticed kind of staircase that goes up several feet, several stories up. And sadly, there were some incidents of people taking their own lives, jumping off that. They had to create some barriers there. And of course, one thing that's sad is when you see a lot of the people who do this, not always, but a lot of times, they're rather young people. And it's so amazing to me that, of course, someone in the prime of their life can feel that way. I hope I haven't gotten too far afield here.
No, I mean, I do think there's this, I notice, and I'm not saying that I'm not able to fall in that well sometimes myself, but an eagerness to be in an epic film. And like, something dramatic and terrible is happening, and our big villain has been revealed, and we are the resistance force that's fighting against it. And it's like we think we're in our own epic movie, and people can get really attached to the drama and the narrative of what's going on. And in a movie, you have to have villains, and you have story arcs, and you have a purpose that keeps getting undermined, and then you have a victory, and then you have another big battle. And so as we are thinking about those things, we start to formulate looking at the world that we're in through that narrative. And once you've figured out who your characters are and what your setup is and what your hero's journey is, you are hard pressed to be pulled out of that movie and then put into, well, actually, what if you're just in a family drama? Or like, what if you're just in sort of I don't know, slightly existential film? Like people are like, no, I had a character that was like a hero of my own world. I had grasped onto the sword. Like what happens in our big battle scene, and I think that is deeply fed by the media. The way that news is told, that's part of the reason that I think that news is very bifurcated, because people like whoever's going to keep telling their story with their lore. And I think that is very dangerous. And it goes back to the sort of boredom front of when you really look at the facts, the terrible character in your story has done some things that are mildly productive, likely, or whatever. There's also maybe some really corrupt things they've done. There's also some inelegant things they've done. There's also, everything is just extremely nuanced and is essentially neutral. And you have to decide how you're going to respond to those things. But to be able to respond to each thing in that moment, within that context, looking at this moment, and then this is a bigger picture that I see, without dramatizing it into a story in which you're the hero of your own universe, is a real challenge.
Yeah. I think one of the problems that we have, and maybe it's it's because we have these great narratives, um, is that it's hard for people sometimes to see the beauty and the value in the ordinary. It's hard for people to see that sometimes incremental change or incremental improvements can be as important as the big dramatic ones. And it's just again, going back to this whole idea about not just courtship but romance, the fact that people want to be wowed. And I'm not knocking that. Sometimes there are moments you want to see something dramatic and powerful, but that not every improvement has to always be that way. And sometimes it's the small things that actually make massive impact over the long haul. But it is interesting that people want that. They want to, and I think that's something very interesting. That's not new, because it's like, when people went on the Crusades, let's be honest, they may say they wanted to, rescue the Holy Land for Christendom, but let's be honest, some of them wanted to get out of the humdrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to march, thousands of miles to an unknown place, but it was an adventure. People don't want to say that, but there was that too. Was there
Yeah.
was there profiteering and hypocrisy? That's a different story. And were some people true believers who really believed what they were doing? Of course. I mean, it's and I think that's a little bit of that here too. I think what fascinates me is that there's, let me put it this way, I work as a tour guide, and I see hundreds, if not thousands, of people every year on tours. Because I'm giving guided tours on average, 20 or so people a tour. Depends, more, less, depends. But sometimes 5 or 6 times a week. And so I meet countless people. And I would say in over 10 years of being a guide, I've probably met, I don't know, thousands of people, most of them from the United States. And most people are really good. And I'm not just saying that because I'm some kind of Pollyanna kind of person who just sees the good in everything. I mean, really just not even super kind, but just a kind of like a basic decency. The kind of person that if you drop something on the floor, they'll tell you right away. They don't think twice about telling you. Or recently somebody pointed out that my fly was open. Which of course is a very humbling thing when you are presenting a professional tour. Remember, I get paid to give tours, so that's a very nice way. If you want to say God or the universe telling you, oh, don't think you're all that just because you tell stories, because you forgot that basic detail, But again, I appreciate the way the guy said it, and not in front of everybody, just off to the side. You need to fix that. And of course, you know what? You get over it. You fix it and you move on. And I think, but I mean, and you see people from all over the world too. And one of the things that I see just from being a guide is a lot of people are really good. Now, don't get me wrong. You get some characters. You get some people. You get some people with some interesting theories, to put it very generously. For example, I go to the 9/11 memorial a lot of times, and believe me, they're but they're really on the margin, and they're really very few from what I see. And most people are really very open, receptive. They appreciate it. They've clearly gone on this tour because they want to learn something. Do they want to have a good time? Absolutely. That's part of the idea. But they still want to learn. They don't simply want to be entertained. And I just love the interaction. And I think that's what's so strange to me about the times we're living in, is the fact that you have a lot of people who seem very decent and reasonable. And I don't understand why there's all of this just ferment of, like, just, negativity and, talk about, conflict and all that. I don't know why this is happening at this time, because
Mm.
because I think I think scientist and thinker Steven Pinker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's talked about how, from statistical points of view, in many respects, until I'd say extremely recently, these could be argued these are some of the best times to be a person in the world. Now, there are issues, obviously potentially with AI and other things, but from a point of view of longevity, lifespan, opportunities, I mean, to be a person today, it's interesting. Recently, it was the passing of actress, comedian, Catherine O'Hara, and I think she died in her early 70s. And it's fascinating. Everybody was like too young, and I think it's very telling today now that if someone dies in their early 70s, people are now saying that's young.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when that wasn't seen as too young at all.
Yeah.
Also, the overall quality of people's lives. I mean, but the thing is, we're seeing all the things that divide us. We're seeing all the things that are negative, and I don't know why this has become such a priority for people. That is it just because what's the old line? If it bleeds, it leads.
Mm.
Is it just easier that conflict and all that? And you've heard this probably too, that a lot of people have been pointing fingers at social media, that people's feeds are always going to be the most difficult, most nasty. It seems to be one extreme or the other, right? It's cute animals, or it's a lot of violent outbursts, or a lot of really negative, out there points of view. And I just think there's something else. I don't know. I guess I'm for the mushy middle.
Well, there's this concept in I don't want to say occultism. I don't know what the correct term is, but people who are like witchy and pagans, let's say, there's a lot of people that believe in a thing called an egregore, which is something that's like an idea or an energy, or it could be an ideology that develops a life of its own and becomes animated and alive through people feeding it. And so that on some level, it's like you've birthed this own entity. And I loosely think about that sometimes even just as a thought experiment with certain things, as a way to relate to certain things. And I would say that we have a political egregore, if you will, this like hate and division and whatever. It seems to have almost a personality and a life force of itself, where you can recognize it when you hear it, even if it's coming from somebody that's not their personality at all. So I think we all have to be mindful of, are you feeding the egregore? Are you participating in it? And I mean, you could think of it as just a shared narrative or an energy that we all are participating in. But, and because that's not going to be the way forward, like obviously we've talked about good people taking positions of power, what it means to have integrity, things like that. That requires some epicness and heroicism at times. But the hatred, the virtue signaling, the ringing of things, I think is, I don't know, I see it like this monster energy that's just pulling people in. And I think we have to be really careful of whatever you have to do to step out of it and not participate. is what that's the cease and desist that you start with. I don't know.
No, I obviously I'm going to come at it through a more narrower Christian lens. I mean, I can understand why some people adopt that concept. I mean, but it is interesting. There seems to be this this kind of collective turmoil that we're having right now, and I mean, and it's interesting because I think it's a great, like any crisis, it can be an opportunity. We can use it to fuel something that is really positive, but it is also something that can turn into something really, like I said, really negative. And it's just fascinating because on one level, like I was saying before, I think there's so much good happening in life, but the other side of it, and I think in other discussions we touched on it about the talk about income inequality. It is, I think, what is fascinating to me is that not only is it just about anger and all that, but to me, a lot of it seems to be built on on selfishness. A lot of it is, and I see this on the left and the right, by the way, which is, and it's manifested in different ways. But I see it's one way or the other. It's, I've got mine, and get out of my way, or if you don't conform to this, you're gonna get canceled. And I and this is something people forget, is that what, for lack of a better term, cancel culture, or whatever you want to call it, comes from all different sectors. It's not a left or a right thing. It's like, you're not conforming to what we like, and then we're gonna use that as a reason to take you out, or at least put you out of the social equation. And it's I guess I'm going back to, again, to this mushy middle of mine. But it is interesting that is something. It is, yeah. There is something that is a, and I just wonder, is that just maybe cyclical? Is it just something in human beings?
I mean, there is that book, The Fourth Turning, where they predict like different directions the country could go, and it's like eerily close to, this was just decades ago. It's like eerily prophetic, because they're talking about cycles of humanity and cycles of America specifically. But but yeah, I don't know. It might be that we sort of can't escape ourselves and we have to play it all out. But I'll end on this, I'll say.
Okay.
I think it goes back to integrity. I think it goes back to all that each of us can do is find our own path, have our own values, be vigorous about checking ourselves and checking in with ourselves and staying true to those things and showing up in accordance with that and who we've chosen to be, instead of getting pulled into external forces clawing for our attention and for our anger and our emotion, but that we are able to stand firm in ourselves. And that can lead you into taking on a position of power, or it could lead you into being somebody who is just maybe more open to people in your life that you really should be connecting with, that then creates more unity that helps us get out of this. So that's my stance.
Well, I think, yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm actually ultimately an optimist. It's very interesting because, for some reason, the historical thing that just popped into my head, weirdly enough, was the French Revolution. Because somebody recently said that income inequality now is not even comparable to the 1920s. It's comparable to, like, France. right before the fall of the Bastille in 1789. Where you had people who were desperately poor, and then you had an aristocracy that had a ton of money, and you had a lot of people that were dispossessed. And of course, we know that a lot of energies came out of that. And the thing about the French Revolution is that we're honest, there was a lot of violence, a lot of horrendous violence committed by all sides. Not just the people who were very determined to establish a republican government, but even some reactionary forces. And there were massacres. There were just a lot of horrendous things going on. But there were also ideas. Orthodoxies were challenged, and things that had been suppressed for so long were at least allowed to give in some kind of air. And old hierarchies were really put to the test. I think what's fascinating, of course, is that even though that revolution, and there was a lot of convulsion and all that, you still have this entity called France today. There's still clearly French people. They may be various colors today. They may have different backgrounds or different beliefs, but I don't think France has disappeared. You can still go see it, and so my hope is that we are challenged, and maybe we get the best out of this time of ferment, and that we can maybe we can shed some bad skin that was meant that needed to be shedded, and maybe that's what this is all about. I don't know. As you probably can imagine, I kind of believe in a higher purpose, but I also know that human beings are very capable. If we want to, we can do great things, or to put it bluntly, we can really fuck it up. Was that okay? Is that acceptable language, or?
Yeah, that's acceptable. I actually just want to end on that quote. It's so good.
Okay, great. It really is our choice. Actually, I'll end it with that great quote of speaking of France, the great existentialist Sartre. He said, "Man is condemned to be free."
I love that. Well, thank you so much. This has been an amazing discussion, and one I certainly needed, and I hope a lot of other people have benefited from as well. So I really appreciate having you.
Well, thank you so much.